In the fall semester of 2011, a group of University of North Florida students enrolled in a film class offered by the Banner Center for Creative Industries decided to produce a short film about one of America's earliest and most unique film producers. The subject of the film, surprisingly, was right in the same town as the university.
We already knew that Jacksonville was considered the winter film capital of the world way before Hollywood, but we didn't know one of the last remaining silent film houses in the country exists right here in our backyard.
In 1920, a young filmmaker named Richard Norman bought the bankrupt Eagle Studios in East Arlington, right across the river from what was then the city of Jacksonville.
Richard Norman was a really interesting man. He would travel across the United States and go to these little towns and pull people off the street to film a movie. And he would show these movies days later in local theaters. And we actually found some pictures from the site, even pictures with him filming.
All this time, these photos were in his collection and no one probably ever thought one thing about them. But when we got them, it was amazing to see that all this history is right at your fingertips. It was exciting. It's like you're uncovering this buried treasure.
But Norman knew the film industry was booming back home in his home state, so he returned to Florida to make silent films in his new studio property.
We did so much research on this project just to make sure we knew exactly what was going on, in the era in Jacksonville back in the 1920s.
What we discovered was that Florida was going through a gilded age. Lots of celebrities were coming in, lots of wealthy people. There was prohibition. Women had just earned the right to vote. Out in Los Angeles, they had their first celebrity wedding. Mary Pickford had just married Douglas Fairbanks. There was a lot going on in the 20s.
We were able to talk with his son, Captain Norman, who told us that back when he was younger, his father was so disheartened by what was going on. We realized that there's something so unique about him. Richard Norman was a white man with an all-black cast, and he wanted to shine light on them in a positive way, and so he cast them in heroic roles, something that had never been done before.
Norman's first film was The Green-Eyed Monster, produced in 5 reels, and was billed as featuring an $80,000 train wreck as part of the picture.
The Green-Eyed Monster was about envy. It was very popular, it was a big hit. He ended up getting letters from a lot of people who wanted to do his films after that, a lot of aspiring actors.
One letter was from the agent of Miss Bessie Coleman, the first pioneer black aviator in the world. The agent writes, "I thought that you could hire her to feature a production for you, as with her reputation, I think it would be a winner."
Miss Coleman actually never made it into the film. She died in an airplane accident, but Richard Norman did write a script inspired by her, and that was called The Flying Ace.
The film is one of the few Norman movies to still exist, and it portrays a World War I fighter pilot who returns home to rescue his sweetheart and her father from railroad thieves.
It was billed as the greatest airplane thriller ever filmed, but really it was just shot right in front of his studios on the ground.
Richard Norman made The Flying Ace, and this movie was a huge hit. It was popular among white audiences as well, and went on to gross more than $20,000, which was huge at the time.
Norman went on to make at least 8 feature films and many other short films between 1920 and 1928. There was one called Black Gold, shot on location in the all-black oil town of Boley, Oklahoma. He shot a feature called The Bulldogger, starring the famous black cowboy Bill Pickett, who invented the sport of steer wrestling or bulldogging. Some of the cowboy movies featured a one-leg movie actor named Steve Peg Reynolds, doing all kinds of daring feats. The first time a handicapped person was ever portrayed as somebody who was in no way a victim.
I think what we've come to realize is that Richard Norman was much more than just a silent filmmaker. He really was a pioneer. And the studio's still standing. It's standing right here in Jacksonville. And if we can be helped in some way in the restoration of the project, it would be great if we can participate in keeping his spirit alive.
In 2002, through the efforts of a few passionate local citizens, the city of Jacksonville purchased 4 of the 5 original Norman buildings. 5 years later, structural repairs and exterior renovations had been completed. Today, the studio grounds are silent sentinels, awaiting adoption by a responsible organization who sees how the Norman Studios could someday be a center for film history and learning, and perhaps more importantly, a place where young filmmakers could be inspired by Richard Norman's groundbreaking work. When you visit the Norman Studios today, there's not much to see, but if you're quiet for a moment, you can almost hear the distant echoes of people excitedly making films that would make you laugh, cry, or even be thrilled by scenes that celebrate the triumph of the human spirit.
Before we started this assignment, I really didn't know why we were working so hard to save a bunch of rundown buildings. And I've realized now that it needs to be remembered. It needs to be preserved. It's a national landmark, I think.
I think it's important to save this film house because of the history and because of the spirit of Richard Norman. He was a pioneer.
No matter what his motives were, what we're left with is a film where African Americans are the heroes. They're not the servants, they're not the slaves, they're not the buffoons. They're just normal people.
It was something he was passionate about, and I think that he wanted to show people nationwide why he felt that way.
I would love to see workshops for aspiring filmmakers, classes. I would just like to see the spirit of Richard Norman continue.
Maybe it'll encourage people to really get into learning about film. I don't think the days are over of creating positive films.
Richard Norman was an example to all of us to reach out, step out of our comfort zone, and become our best.
This place, the Richard Norman Studios, it needs to be preserved, to be remembered and celebrated.